Most plans fail because they begin with the wrong question. They begin with what should I do? What strategy should I follow? What routine should I copy? What habit will fix my life? And on the surface, those seem like smart questions. They sound practical, logical, responsible. But logic alone has never carried anyone through uncertainty, sacrifice, and pain. Logic explains, it does not inspire. Because when life gets difficult, and it always does, logic is the first thing to fall apart. The reason most plans fail before they even begin is not because the plan is poorly designed, it's because the plan is emotionally empty. It has no meaning attached to it. No cause, no belief, no internal pull. People assume that clarity comes from knowing what to do, but clarity comes from knowing why you must do it even when you don't want to. When the plan starts with what, the commitment is shallow. It lives in the mind, not the heart. And the mind is excellent at negotiating exits when discomfort appears. Think about how often people say, I know what I need to do. Eat better, wake up earlier, be consistent, focus, save money, work harder, knowing what has never been the problem. The problem is that knowing what doesn't give you a reason to suffer, and every meaningful plan requires suffering. There will be days when progress is invisible, days when effort feels pointless, days when quitting feels logical, and in those moments the plan will ask a question it was never designed to answer. Why does this matter enough to continue? If the plan can't answer that question, it collapses. This is why two people can follow the exact same plan with the same resources, the same information, and get completely different outcomes. One persists, the other disappears. The difference isn't intelligence, it isn't discipline, it isn't access, it's belief. One person is driven by something deeper than the task itself. The other is just following instructions. When your plan begins with what, success depends on mood. When it begins with why, success depends on identity. And identity is far stronger than motivation. A plan built on what sounds like this. I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m. and work out. I'm going to post content every day. I'm going to start this business. A plan built on why sounds different. I refuse to live a life where my potential goes unused. I owe it to the people who believe in me. I will not let fear be the author of my story. The first version needs encouragement. The second version creates it. When people don't know their why, they borrow one. They chase goals that look impressive. They copy routines that worked for someone else. They pursue outcomes that earn applause. But borrowed purpose never survives private struggle, because when the applause stops, when no one is watching, when results are slow, borrowed purpose evaporates. That's when people say, I lost motivation. They didn't lose motivation, they never had meaning. A strong why does something powerful. It turns effort into expression. The work is no longer something you force yourself to do, it becomes something that reflects who you are. And when the plan reflects who you are, quitting feels like self-betrayal. That's why starting with why is not poetic. It's practical. It gives the plan endurance. Without why, a plan is fragile. It depends on external conditions being favorable. It depends on energy being high. It depends on things going right. But why is internal. It travels with you into chaos. It remains steady when conditions are unstable. This is why people abandon plans the moment life interrupts them. They didn't decide what mattered most. They decided what was convenient, starting with what is safe, starting with why is confronting, because why forces honesty. It asks questions people avoid. Why does this matter to me? What pain am I trying to escape? What future am I trying to protect? Who do I become if I follow through? And who do I become if I don't? These questions are uncomfortable, but discomfort is where commitment is born. When people skip this step, they end up with plans that sound good but feel hollow, plans that look impressive but collapse under pressure. And then they blame themselves. They say, I'm inconsistent, I lack discipline, I don't have willpower. But the issue is never willpower. Willpower is a limited resource. Meaning is renewable. People with a strong why don't need to feel ready. They feel responsible. Responsible to their future self. Responsible to their values. Responsible to the standard they refuse to lower. That sense of responsibility changes everything. It turns ordinary actions into acts of integrity. And integrity is not about being perfect. It's about being aligned. When your plan is aligned with your why, progress feels meaningful even when it's slow. Effort feels justified even when it hurts. That's why plans that start with "why" don't need constant redesign. They don't collapse at the first obstacle. They adapt because the goal is no longer the plan itself. The goal is the cause behind it. So before writing another schedule, before setting another goal, before chasing another strategy, pause. Ask yourself not what you want to do, but why failing to do it is no longer acceptable. When that answer is clear, the plan stops being optional, and that is the moment it finally begins. Most plans don't collapse because people lack ambition. They collapse because people misunderstand what actually carries them forward when ambition fades. At the beginning, everything feels possible. Energy is high. Vision is clear. The plan looks clean and manageable. And people confuse that feeling with commitment. They think excitement is proof that they're ready. But excitement is temporary. It is a spark, not a fuel source. The second keynote is this. People mistake motivation for discipline and emotion for commitment. And when emotions change, they assume something has gone wrong. Nothing has gone wrong. This is exactly where the plan was supposed to get difficult. Motivation is reactive. It responds to inspiration, novelty, and visible progress. It thrives when things are new and rewarding. But plans are not sustained in novelty. They are sustained in repetition. And repetition is rarely exciting. The moment repetition begins, motivation fades. That is the moment most plans fail, quietly and without drama. Not because the person decided to quit, but because they stopped deciding to continue. They wait to feel like doing the work again. But discipline doesn't wait for feelings. Discipline is a decision made in advance. And here's the part most people miss. Discipline is not about punishment or force. It is about trust. Trust in a decision you made when you were clear-minded, not emotionally compromised. When people say they lack discipline, what they're really saying is that they don't trust themselves enough to keep promises when it's uncomfortable. That lack of trust doesn't come from weakness. It comes from history, from all the times they started strong and stopped early, from all the plans that quietly disappeared. So the next plan is treated like a suggestion instead of a commitment. And suggestions are easy to ignore. Plans fail when they are built on feelings instead of standards. A feeling says, "I'll do this when I'm motivated." A standard says, "This is who I am, regardless of how I feel." Standards remove negotiation. When there is no standard, every decision becomes a debate. Should I rest or push? Should I skip today? Should I start tomorrow? Debate drains energy. Standards conserve it. This is why consistency looks effortless in some people. It's not because they're more driven, it's because they've eliminated choice in key areas of their life. They don't decide if they show up. They only decide how. Most plans fail early because they leave too many decisions open. They rely on daily self-control instead of predetermined commitments. And self-control is fragile. Another reason plans collapse is that people expect discipline to feel good. They expect clarity, confidence, certainty, but discipline often feels like doubt paired with action. You don't always feel strong while doing the right thing. You feel strong later. When you look back and realize you didn't quit, the reward of discipline is delayed. And in a world addicted to immediacy, delayed rewards feel invisible. So people abandon the plan not because it isn't working, but because the reward hasn't arrived fast enough to justify the effort. But discipline was never about immediate reward. It was about long-term trust. Trust that your future self will benefit from what your present self is willing to endure. This is why people who rely on motivation burn out. Motivation demands constant emotional input. Discipline only demands alignment, and alignment is quieter, steadier, and far more reliable. Plans also fail because people underestimate the emotional cost of consistency. They prepare for tasks but not for resistance. They plan schedules but not self-doubt. They plan goals but not boredom. They plan outcomes but not loneliness. So when resistance appears, it feels like a sign to stop instead of a signal to strengthen. Resistance is not the enemy of the plan. It is proof that the plan matters. Anything meaningful will challenge. GE, the version of you that prefers comfort. If the plan doesn't require discomfort, it doesn't require growth. And yet, when discomfort shows up, people panic. They assume they chose wrong. They start searching for a better plan, one that hurts less. But there is no plan worth following that doesn't hurt at some point. The difference is not in how much it hurts, but in how much you're willing to endure for what you believe in. That willingness cannot be manufactured in the moment. It must be decided beforehand. This is why the strongest plans are boring, predictable, repetitive. They don't rely on heroic effort. They rely on rhythm. They are designed to be followed on bad days, not just good ones. People fail not because they set the bar too high, but because they didn't build a floor strong enough to stand on when they fall short. They aimed for intensity instead of sustainability. Discipline is not intensity, it is reliability. It's choosing to do a little every day instead of everything when you feel inspired. And here's the paradox: the more disciplined you become, the less discipline you need, because behavior turns into identity. At first you act disciplined, then you become disciplined, and once behavior aligns with identity, effort decreases. You no longer ask, should I do this? You say, this is what I do. Plans that reach this stage rarely fail, because stopping would require becoming someone else. That is why most plans fail before they even begin. They are built for emotions, not identity. They depend on motivation, not trust. They expect feelings to carry responsibility. If you want your next plan to survive, stop asking how to stay motivated. Ask how to become the kind of person who follows through regardless of mood. Decide your standards, remove unnecessary choices, commit in advance, and accept discomfort as part of the process, not a sign of failure. When discipline replaces motivation, the plan stops being fragile, and for the first time, it has a chance to last. Most plans fail before they even begin because people design them for perfection instead of reality. We live in a culture obsessed with optimal conditions, as if life will pause to allow us to execute our plans flawlessly. We assume the morning will be calm, energy will be abundant, distractions minimal, and everyone around us supportive. We imagine that the world will cooperate, and if it doesn't, we label the plan a failure. The truth is that life is messy. Life is unpredictable. Life interrupts the best laid schemes with meetings, emergencies, sickness, bad news, and moods that swing like pendulums. And most plans, the ones that fail before they begin, were never built for this reality. They were built for imagination. They were built for ideal circumstances that exist only on spreadsheets and vision boards. The plans that survive are not those that were perfect at conception. They are the ones that anticipate imperfection. They are the ones designed with flexibility, resilience, and adaptability in mind. People fail to start their plans because they are unconsciously asking for guarantees. They want a road that has no potholes, no detours, no obstacles. And when no road guarantees success, they hesitate, they procrastinate, and they never take the first step. Planning is not the problem. Overplanning is. Overplanning is a method of self-deception. It gives the illusion of control and feeds the ego with the comfort of structure. But structure without action is meaningless. Sitting at a desk, tweaking a plan for days or weeks does not produce results. It produces anxiety masked as preparation. And in that anxiety, people convince themselves they are ready, even as they avoid starting. Real progress comes when a plan is tested against reality, not when it looks perfect on paper. The most successful plans account for variables beyond your control. They assume interruptions, they assume setbacks, they assume failure at some points along the way, and they are designed to continue anyway. They are not rigid. They are like a river flowing around rocks, bending but never breaking. People fail to begin because they underestimate the friction of execution. They see the finish line and imagine the path is smooth. They forget that every meaningful plan intersects with resistance. Resistance comes in many forms: distraction, fatigue, self-doubt, criticism, and boredom. If the plan does not account for these forces, it will fail. And if a person does not prepare to endure resistance, the plan will fail before it even leaves the starting line. The hardest part of starting a plan is imagining yourself doing it when life is difficult, not when it is convenient. Most plans are conceived in moments of comfort, when optimism is high and energy abundant. But the future is rarely as kind. That is why testing the plan mentally before it begins is critical. To imagine how you will behave when the energy is low, when distractions are many, when your body or mind tells you to quit. If you cannot see yourself continuing through discomfort, the plan is doomed. Another reason plans fail before they start is because they are built for outcomes, not for process. People fall in love with the idea of results. They chase numbers, appearances, promotions, awards, or milestones. But plans based solely on outcomes are fragile. When results do not arrive instantly or in the expected form, motivation dies and the plan collapses. A plan built on process, however, survives delays, errors, and detours. It focuses on what can be controlled, the actions you take daily, the habits you enforce, the standards you uphold. Plans also fail before they begin because people overestimate their ability to maintain perfect focus. They assume their environment will support them fully, that willpower alone will be sufficient, and that every day will feel like the first day of commitment. But willpower is finite. Life is unpredictable. Environment matters. And most people fail to create a system that removes friction and reduces unnecessary choices. Every small decision that goes against your plan chips away at mental energy. Without designing for reality, plans require more energy than a human can sustainably provide. The plans that endure do not rely on constant heroism. They rely on routine, redundancy, and foresight. They anticipate errors and schedule margin for correction. They assume fatigue and design around it. They know that human beings are not perfect and that life will never conform to an imagined blueprint. By planning for the mess, they ensure the plan will survive the mess. People fail to start because they are afraid of imperfect execution. They believe that if they cannot execute flawlessly, why from day one it is better to wait until conditions are perfect. But perfection is a mirage. It is a story we tell ourselves to avoid risk. Plans are living things. They need to be tested, adjusted, and iterated. Waiting for the perfect moment guarantees inaction. Acting imperfectly guarantees progress and learning. One of the most critical mistakes is failing to plan for feedback. The most successful plans incorporate checkpoints, reviews, and adjustments. People fail before they start because they believe success is linear. They believe that if they make a mistake, the plan has failed. They are unprepared for trial and error. But plans that survive embrace error as information. They treat obstacles as signals, not endpoints. The path to completion is never straight. A plan that ignores the twists and turns of reality is a plan that dies before it leaves the starting line. The psychological factor is also significant. People fear disappointment and use over-planning as a shield. They convince themselves that if the plan fails, it is not their fault. It was the plan's fault. But in truth, the fault lies in avoiding the hard first step, the first action that tests theory against reality. To begin a plan is to accept uncertainty. To begin a plan is to accept responsibility for adaptation. Most people are unwilling to take that risk in advance. Starting a plan is a test of courage, not courage in performing tasks, but courage in facing the unknown, courage in accepting that discomfort is inevitable, courage in imagining yourself persisting when energy is low and results are delayed. Most plans fail before they begin because people are afraid to imagine themselves failing. They are afraid to imagine the difficulty before it happens. And so they delay, rationalize, and eventually abandon even the idea of starting. The solution is deceptively simple. Design your plan for reality, not fantasy. Assume imperfection. Account for setbacks. Commit to process, not outcome. Reduce unnecessary choices. Build routines that can survive fatigue. Treat resistance as proof that you are on the right path, not a signal to quit. Expect error and prepare to iterate. Accept discomfort as an integral part of growth. Test your imagination by visualizing how you will continue when motivation fades. And, above all, anchor the plan in something bigger than results. Anchor it in identity, in why, and the reason you refuse to quit. When a plan is built with these principles, it stops being fragile. It stops depending on motivation, emotion, or ideal circumstances. It gains resilience. It adapts to interruptions, survives setbacks, and continues forward because it was designed for life as it is, not life as you wish it would be. The plans that endure are not perfect at the start. They are imperfect, flexible, and responsive. They are designed for mess, for fatigue, for doubt, and for human error. They start with action, not perfection. They start with courage, not guarantees. They start by imagining reality, not comfort. And when you start with reality in mind, the plan begins not on paper, but in life itself. Messy, difficult, unpredictable, and alive. Most plans fail before they even begin because people design them for a world that does not exist. The plans that succeed are the ones designed for the world that does exist, a world full of interruptions, challenges, setbacks, and mistakes. They succeed not because the conditions were perfect, but because the plan was prepared to survive imperfection. And when you prepare for imperfection, the plan no longer waits for the perfect moment. It begins immediately, enduring and adaptable, ready to survive and thrive in the reality that no plan ever escapes. Most plans fail before they even begin because people underestimate the role of fear. Fear is invisible. It lurks quietly in the background while people polish their plans, organize their schedules, and prepare their strategies. And the strangest thing about fear is that it doesn't need to be rational to be powerful. You can have the clearest plan in the world, the most well-structured roadmap, and still freeze at the starting line simply because the unknown feels too big. Fear manifests in many ways. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of embarrassment, fear of disappointment, fear of pain, and fear of the unknown. It whispers subtle lies. Maybe now isn't the right time. Maybe this isn't worth the risk. Maybe you should wait for more information. And when fear is unrecognized, it quietly sabotages action. Most plans fail before they begin because fear wins the moment it goes unacknowledged. People are not afraid of failure itself. They are afraid of the consequences of failure. They fear the social rejection, the ridicule, the internal shame that comes from looking in the mirror and realizing they didn't follow through. And because the mind is wired to avoid discomfort, it will create endless excuses to justify inaction. The longer people sit in analysis and overthinking, the more elaborate their excuses become. Eventually, the plan never starts, and the mind convinces itself that the inaction is strategic rather than fearful. Another reason plans fail is that people are addicted to certainty. We want guarantees before we commit. We want 100% assurance that this plan will produce results, that the world will respond favorably, that obstacles will be manageable. But certainty is a myth. Life offers no guarantees. The conditions will never be perfect. Waiting for certainty guarantees inaction. Fear keeps people waiting for conditions that will never arrive. Fear also thrives on comparison. People measure themselves against others who appear to have it all figured out. They see someone else's success and think, I can't start because I'm not ready yet. They believe their resources are insufficient, their skills inadequate, their timing wrong. Comparison paralyzes. It makes action feel risky, even reckless. And in this paralysis, plans die before they have a chance to breathe life. The antidote to fear is not the elimination of risk. It is clarity of purpose. When a person knows why they are pursuing a plan, the fear does not disappear. It becomes manageable. Fear is still present, but it becomes a companion rather than a tyrant. The mind acknowledges the risk but chooses action because the reason to act outweighs the reason to hide. That is why plans that survive are anchored in identity and purpose, not just tasks and outcomes. Most people do not fail because they are incapable. They fail because fear convinces them that doing nothing is safer than doing something. And in the short term, doing nothing feels safe. It feels like protection. It feels like prudence. But over time, the cost of inaction accumulates, opportunities vanish, confidence erodes, momentum disappears, and the regret of never having tried becomes heavier than any temporary fear. Plans that fail before they begin carry no visible wound, but the psychological cost is profound. Fear also magnifies the unknown. The mind is excellent at imagining worst-case scenarios. When people think about starting a plan, they often exaggerate the risks, envisioning failure as catastrophic instead of instructive. They anticipate judgment, embarrassment, financial loss, or social rejection as absolute outcomes rather than possibilities to be navigated. And when the unknown feels unbearable, the plan never starts. Planning is often a way to mask fear. People create long lists, timelines, contingencies, and alternatives in the hope that preparation will remove risk. But preparation cannot remove fear. it can only postpone it. The only way to conquer fear is to take the first step into it. Action diminishes fear because it replaces imagined risk with experienced reality. Plans fail before they begin when people allow preparation to substitute for courage. Another subtle reason fear stops plans before they begin is the illusion of readiness. People think that the perfect moment will arrive when they finally feel confident, skilled, or equipped enough to begin. But the perfect moment does not exist. Feeling ready is a luxury, not a requirement. The difference between success and failure is not perfect timing. It is the willingness to begin despite imperfection. Every plan that ultimately succeeds was imperfect at the start, but it began anyway. Fear also undermines plans by creating emotional fatigue before the first step is taken. Anticipation of challenges, self-doubt, and imagined consequences can exhaust the mind more than actual effort. By the time someone finally is ready, they are already tired of the mental struggle. The energy required to overcome inertia is greater than the energy they imagined. This is why starting a plan requires not just strategy, but courage. The kind of courage that allows you to act, even when you feel weak, unsure, or afraid. Plans fail before they begin when people ignore the cumulative effect of small fears. Each hesitation, each mental objection, each "I'll do it tomorrow" adds weight to inertia. Individually, these moments feel trivial, but collectively they form a wall. The wall grows higher with every unacted upon decision until finally it feels insurmountable. Starting a plan in the presence of fear requires breaking through that wall step by step, not waiting for it to disappear. The plans that succeed are those that anticipate fear and integrate strategies to overcome it. They normalize discomfort. They recognize doubt as inevitable. They allow mistakes and iteration. They separate the action from the emotion, understanding that feelings will fluctuate, but choices are consistent. When fear arises, the plan does not pause. It moves forward with humility and persistence. Fear is not a sign that a plan is wrong. It is a signal that the plan is meaningful. If the plan were trivial, fear would be absent. Only plans that challenge identity, challenge comfort, and challenge limitation provoke fear. Recognizing this truth transforms fear from a barrier into a guide. Fear indicates where growth will occur. Plans fail when people ignore fear, but plans survive when people acknowledge it, prepare for it, and act through it. Finally, plans fail before they begin because people underestimate the necessity of emotional courage. Planning is often treated as a mechanical process: set goals, write steps, assign timelines, but it is deeply emotional. It requires vulnerability, honesty, and willingness to be exposed. Fear thrives in secrecy and isolation. The plan that survives engages not just strategy, but emotion. It is anchored in conviction, shared purpose, and clarity of values. Emotional courage fuels persistence when intellect and motivation waver. To begin a plan, one must first confront fear directly, recognize it, name it, and understand its purpose. Use fear as a compass rather than a cage. Understand that fear is not a reason to delay. It is a reason to prepare thoughtfully and act decisively. Every plan that succeeds begins not in comfort, but in courage. Every plan that fails before it starts does so because fear was allowed to dictate terms rather than inform action. Plans do not require the absence of fear. They require the presence of resolve. Fear will always exist, but resolve is the muscle that moves people forward regardless. Resolve says, "I will begin despite uncertainty. I will begin despite doubt. I will begin despite the risk of failure or criticism." Plans fail when people hope fear will disappear. Plans succeed when people act anyway. In the end, the fourth keynote is simple. Fear is natural, inevitable, and unavoidable, but it is not fatal. Plans fail before they begin because people let fear dominate their imagination instead of guiding their action. The plans that survive begin in courage, move through discomfort, and persist not because the conditions are perfect, but because the person behind the plan refuses to let fear dictate the first step. When courage meets preparation, fear is no longer a barrier. It becomes a signpost that the plan is meaningful, and meaningful plans are the ones that endure. Most plans fail before they even begin because people underestimate the role of identity. They focus on actions, tasks, and steps without asking the deeper question, who am I becoming in the process? Identity is the invisible engine behind every successful plan. It is the reason someone persists when motivation fades, when fear rises, when the world feels heavy. Plans that ignore identity rely solely on willpower, and willpower is fleeting. Identity, however, endures. When a plan is aligned with identity, action is no longer optional. It is inevitable. The difference between a plan that dies before it begins and one that thrives is not the clarity of the steps, the perfection of the strategy, or even the quality of the tools. The difference is whether the plan resonates with the person who will execute it. If the plan feels disconnected from who you are or who you want to be, resistance will overpower intention. It is impossible to sustain action without a reason that is larger than the task itself. Most people fail before starting because they design plans around outcomes rather than who they want to become. They say, I want to lose 20 pounds, or I want to launch a business, or I want to be productive, but these statements describe results, not identity. Results are fleeting. They can be measured, yes, but they do not create the internal pull necessary to overcome challenges. Identity, on the other hand, is enduring. When a person says, I am the kind of person who prioritizes health, or I am the kind of person who builds, rather than complains, the plan ceases to be optional. Every action is a reflection of the person they are choosing to be. Identity also gives plans resilience. When motivation dies, when fear rises, when conditions turn difficult, identity persists. Motivation is temporary, fear is reactive, and circumstances are unpredictable, but identity is constant. If you have decided who you are, every action becomes an act of consistency rather than effort. The plan is no longer a burden, it is an expression. And that is why plans that fail before they begin almost always lack this foundation of identity. People underestimate identity because it is abstract. They focus on measurable goals, deadlines, and results because they feel tangible. They do not recognize that identity is what sustains measurable results. Without identity, actions are sporadic, commitment is shallow, and the plan collapses the moment difficulty appears. Identity is the silent force that carries a plan through adversity. It is the reason someone works when no one is watching, trains when the energy is gone, creates when the mood is absent, and shows up when the world offers no applause. Another reason plans fail before they start is that people confuse behavior with identity. They say, I will do this or I will act that way. But the action is disconnected from self-concept. Without the alignment of identity, behavior becomes temporary. It depends on emotion, energy, and conditions. Identity transforms behavior into a lifestyle, a standard, and a habit that continues regardless of circumstance. It turns effort into expression, work into integrity, and consistency into inevitability. The strongest plans also anticipate change in the person executing them. Life is not static. Circumstances evolve, challenges shift, and people grow. Plans that fail often assume that the person executing them will remain exactly the same from day one to the finish line. But human beings are dynamic. Their skills, beliefs, and perspectives evolve. Plans that survive are flexible enough to account for personal growth while anchored in a core identity that remains steadfast. Plans fail before they begin when people allow identity to be influenced by external validation rather than internal conviction. They pursue goals because society says they should, because comparison convinces them that certain achievements define worth, or because temporary emotion demands immediate action. Plans that depend on external approval are fragile. They bend and break with every opinion, judgment, or distraction. Plans anchored in internal identity are resilient because they answer to one authority, the self they are committed to becoming. Another factor is the gap between current identity and desired identity. People fail before starting because they perceive the gap as too wide. They say, I can't follow this plan because I am not disciplined enough, or I cannot succeed because I am not talented enough. They confuse current limitations with permanent identity. The truth is that identity is malleable. It grows through action, repetition, and commitment. A plan succeeds when a person embraces the journey of becoming the kind of person who can execute it, rather than waiting to already be that person before starting. Plans fail when people underestimate the role of alignment between identity and environment. Identity alone is not enough. It must interact with context, resources, and support systems. A plan that challenges identity but exists in a hostile environment will struggle. That is why building systems that reinforce identity is critical. Surround yourself with reminders of who you are committed to becoming, structures that make aligned behavior easier, and influences that encourage consistency. When identity and environment work together, the plan does not merely survive, it thrives. People fail before beginning because they allow short-term comfort to outweigh long-term identity. They choose ease over growth. They choose avoidance over commitment. They prioritize temporary relief over the discomfort required to transform. The cost of inaction is rarely visible in the moment, but it accumulates silently, eroding confidence, potential, and opportunity. Plans fail because people treat identity as optional, temporary, or negotiable. But when identity is non-negotiable, the plan begins immediately, persists relentlessly, and adapts continuously. The fifth reason identity matters is because it transforms uncertainty into direction. Every plan carries risk, every path is unpredictable, and every outcome is uncertain. Without a clear sense of who you are, uncertainty paralyzes. But when why is clarified, uncertainty becomes navigable. The question shifts from, will I succeed, to does this action reflect who I am? Decisions become simpler. Choices are filtered through values and self-concept. Resistance becomes a guide rather than a barrier. Fear becomes manageable. Action becomes inevitable. Identity also fuels patience and perseverance. Most plans fail because people expect instant results. They become frustrated, disillusioned, and abandon their course when success is delayed. Identity provides perspective. It reminds the person executing the plan that they are not simply chasing outcomes. They are becoming someone who is capable of sustaining effort over the long haul. Identity converts short-term struggle into long-term growth, making the plan not just a series of actions, but a path of transformation. Finally, plans fail before they begin when people do not emotionally connect with their identity. Identity is not merely a statement of intent, it is a feeling, a commitment, a daily choice. You do not become disciplined by telling yourself you are, you become disciplined by acting in alignment with that identity repeatedly until it becomes undeniable. The plan succeeds when the person executing it lives as if the identity is already true, creating momentum that transcends fear, distraction, and doubt. A plan anchored in identity also encourages accountability, not to external systems, schedules, or pressures, but to the self. This is the most powerful form of accountability. When you define yourself as someone who follows through, every action is a reflection of integrity. Stopping is not an option because it is inconsistent with who you are. Plans fail before they begin when people attempt to execute without this internal accountability. Plans thrive when identity drives behavior. IOR and behavior reinforces identity. Ultimately, the fifth keynote is simple. Plans fail before they begin when they ignore the human being tasked with executing them. Plans that succeed recognize that action, consistency, and persistence are impossible without anchoring in identity. Plans must answer the question, who am I becoming in the process of executing this plan? Without a clear answer, fear dominates, motivation fades, and inaction prevails. With a clear answer, every first step becomes inevitable, every obstacle manageable, and every setback an opportunity to reinforce commitment to the person you are becoming. Identity transforms plans from fragile, temporary, and optional to resilient, sustainable, and inevitable. It is the reason a person will show up when energy is gone, when fear rises, and when the world does not notice. Identity turns repetition into habit, effort into integrity, and challenge into growth. Plans that survive, adapt, and achieve their purpose always start with identity. Everything else, the steps, the schedules, the strategies, follows naturally. The plans that fail before they begin are those built without identity at their core. The plans that succeed are those that start with identity, endure through fear, adapt to reality, persist through discomfort, and are powered by purpose. When identity drives the plan, the first step is no longer the hardest. It is inevitable. And from that inevitability, everything else begins to fall into place. If we step back and look at why most plans fail before they even begin, the answer is not about tools, strategies, or even knowledge. It is about people. It is about the human being who is meant to execute the plan, their beliefs, their fears, their identity, and their willingness to endure discomfort. Plans are not fragile because they are poorly constructed. They are fragile because they ask too much of people who are not prepared, not aligned, and not convinced that the journey is worth the struggle. Every plan begins with an idea, but ideas alone are fragile. They need purpose to survive. They need meaning to persist. When a plan starts with what to do instead of why it matters, it has no internal compass. Motivation can lift it briefly, but motivation is fleeting. Excitement fades. Energy wanes, and when the inevitable pain, obstacles, and delays appear, the plan collapses. Meaning is the difference between a plan that dies quietly and a plan that carries forward, resilient, through challenge and adversity. Discipline, not motivation, sustains action. Yet most people overestimate motivation and underestimate the power of standards. They rely on emotion rather than identity, and when emotion fades, action fades with it. Discipline is not punishment, it is trust. Trust in a commitment you have made to yourself long before the first obstacle arrives. Discipline turns repetition into identity, and identity turns identity into inevitability. Without it, the first setback becomes a permanent stop sign. Plans also fail because they are built for perfection instead of reality. People overplan for ideal conditions, imagining smooth paths, predictable circumstances, and constant support. Life does not work that way. Life is messy. Life interrupts. Life tests resolve. Plans that survive anticipate setbacks, integrate flexibility, and prepare for discomfort. Plans that fail assume a world that does not exist and wait for conditions that will never arrive. The courage to begin imperfectly, to start despite uncertainty, is what separates action from paralysis. Fear is a silent killer of plans. It hides behind rationalization, comparison, and the illusion of readiness. People fear failure, embarrassment, and discomfort, and they convince themselves that waiting will protect them. But waiting guarantees nothing. Acting despite fear is the only way forward. Fear is not a barrier, it is a sign that the plan matters. The moment you acknowledge fear and step into it anyway, the plan begins to live. Finally, identity is the foundation of every plan that lasts. Without clarity on who you are becoming, action is sporadic, consistency is fleeting, and commitment crumbles at the first challenge. Identity turns behavior into habit, action into integrity, and struggle into growth. It makes the plan non-negotiable, inevitable, and resilient. When your plan reflects who you are at your core, every step, no matter how small, moves you forward. Every obstacle becomes surmountable because quitting would betray who you have decided to be. If you take one thing from this speech, let it be this. The success of a plan does not begin with strategy. It begins with why. It is sustained by discipline. It adapts to reality. It is courageous in the face of fear, and it is anchored in identity. Start there. Align yourself first, because when the person executing the plan is ready, the plan will not fail. It will move, it will endure, and it will transform not just your results, but who you are becoming in the process.